Action item, the first item that we will have tonight would be the DeKalb County Board of Education district budget for 2015-2016, presented by Dr. Bell or the superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to call forward our CFO, Dr. Michael Bell, to present the FY 2015-16 budget. And I would also, prior to his presentation, like to take this opportunity to once again thank Dr. Bell and his staff for outstanding leadership and stewardship of the fiscal affairs of the DeKalb County School District. During the last 2.5 years, he's been an outstanding leader, and because of his leadership and direction, we made tremendous progress in improving and enhancing and stabilizing the fiscal affairs of the district. And Dr. Bell, I would like to thank you personally for your leadership, your support, and your friendship. And with that, offer you the opportunity to make this presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Superintendent, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, board members. As Mr. Thurman mentioned, we're here to discuss what has previously been put on the table as the tentative budget, which y'all approved, June 1st. And we have a slightly modified package, which Ms. Francois has. She will distribute it to you. The numbers are very similar, but there are some important modifications that the superintendent has directed to make that we will be discussing. Thank you, Margaret. The package you see in front of you starts with consolidated or the tentative budget summary sheet, which you've seen before. You can see that the totals are quite similar. The biggest change on this sheet, which we will highlight as we move to what we call the T sheet, the second larger sheet, of course, is an expansion of the 432 payroll or the salary program to include the teacher salary schedule, what's known as Schedule E in the district, okay? But just taking a look at the standard fund structure that we have in the district, there's not much change on this first page. I would draw your attention to the 3* note at the bottom of the page, which indicates that the teacher scale employee modification of the previous 432 plan will cost or will increase the size of the general fund by $780,196, except you'll notice that the bottom total for the fund is the same. At the superintendent's direction, we funded the $780,196 from the defunding of the Gateway to College Charter School, which was pointed out that we had incorrectly funded in that it has been terminated. So we took the $780,196 from the $1,000,001, which was in Gateway, and left the difference up inside the charter school division. And the whole $1,000,001 was in the budget previously in the charter school division for Gateway. So bottom line, there is no change in the general fund total. Moving on to the second page, which is the T sheet, which we're all familiar with, I would just sort of start with the fund balance block at the top. And you'll see that up in the top left, the projected $80,870,000 for the end of 15 fund balance is the same. As was referenced previously, the superintendent has directed there be an assignment of that of $10 million for a pre-tax retirement option, okay? That, of course, has not been developed, or discussed in any detail, but that is something that he wants to leave on the table as we go forward into this budget discussion. The revenue sources are the same on the left side of the page. The local revenue source, which is not all ad valorem, there's some subdivisions in that, but our anticipation in local revenue is the same at $439,282,000. On the state revenue side, we've discussed this previously. The state has indicated to us an increase in QBE funding of about $24.2 million past our mid-year position. So the anticipated state revenue we're asking you all to adopt is $435,564, or a total revenue anticipation from those two major sources of $874,847,628. If you take a look at what is proposed on the bottom of the T-sheet page in terms of the budget, and it didn't really change because of the teacher salaries schedule incorporation because of the coverage by the Gateway funds. We've got revenue of $874,847. We've got a budget appropriation request of $874,489,990, or remaining funds on the table if all of this happens exactly of $357,000, which would bring the fund balance beginning of $80,800,000 to the $81,228,000. Okay, so that overall structure is pretty much the same. There's been some fleshing out of the line item for the retirement option, and no changes to the major components of local revenue and state revenue. We've discussed, and again on this page you'll see the Gateway to College Charter defunded amount was used of $780,196 to cover the teacher schedule, and the $319 was left in the charter division. We've talked about the various major components of this proposed budget. Base salary and benefits at $666.5 million, okay? Keep in mind that there's really a base budget analysis is done in the schools component of that every year with Dr. Preston's QBE and allotment analysis. And so of the 666, there's like $564.1 million that really the budget has been built from the base on up. That money, of course, we budget at the sites of the schools. The additional allotments associated with our enrollment growth is that column is indicated to total $17.7 million, okay? There are some salary savings anticipations in that because, of course, we're not going to hire all those teachers at one point in time, so we've made some assumptions about the lag up in hiring. The next column over is the old 432 plan column supplemented by the teacher salary scale, and that number is up about $2.6 million. I think y'all have seen that in some of the communications recently, to $23,253,000. The bottom of the page maintains the lower paid employee enhancements, and we have Brenda Hudgens from HR here to speak if there's any additional detail that's required of that. So the teacher salary scale, the E scale, and on top of the old 432 plan, and the lower paid employee, all of those components are retained in this document. The next column is a TRS increase. You know, we participate substantially in the teachers' retirement system of Georgia. The state has directed that the district side funding increase from 13.15% of salaries to 14.27% of salaries. And there is some discussion, though it's not finalized yet, that there might be a mid-year medical benefit requirement adjustment that the state could ask for, but there's no clear direction on that, okay? That could be as much as $4.5 million. We don't have that in now because have not been directed to do it. So all of that being said, the non-salary discretionary total of 158 are just sort of what it says. It's the additional amounts in the 16 budget that are not salary. There were some specific additions requested by the superintendent of $2.9 million, and all of that moving left to right will give you the total for the general fund. Of course, that's only one of our 6 funds, of $874,489,990,000. So what the page, and y'all are familiar with this, shows is you start with the $80.8 million, you assign 10 on this retirement option. The actual funding of the budget is taken care of by our revenue anticipations. We're not pulling down into the budget expenditure status any part of the fund balance, other than this assignment, which is not pulled down either, but it's stated as the $10 million retirement option. Okay, behind those two pages, and they kind of lay out everything, you have in your package the teacher salary scale positions that'll be impacted by going to what's known as the E scale, okay? Yes, sir.
Like Mr. Chairman, the board members and administration stated during the most recent board meeting, concerns were raised about which school-based employees would participate in what has become commonly known as the 432 plan, whereas our most veteran teachers, educators, and others would benefit from a higher COLA increase than other employees. What we had stated previous to this is that the final determination as to who would be included would be reserved based on Dr. Bell's earlier projection. We wanted to watch the budget as we reached the end of the current fiscal year. So the teacher salary scale is very important because I know board members will get questions about who's in and who's not. Our strategy from the very beginning was to wait until we were absolutely certain not to spend money we didn't have. And the way I understand it, Mr. Bell, and I know we have someone from Human Resources, these are all the positions currently what we call the E scale, teacher salary scale positions. All of these individuals are currently classified in that category. And so individuals, the most veteran individuals, 0 to 6, and it relates to all of these positions, will be eligible for a 4% increase, and those with less experience, 0 to 5, would be eligible for a 3% increase. And we've gotten a lot of comments from the psychologists. I know Dr. Morley has asked numerous questions, social workers. So this is the list. This is the official list. The first list is the official list. And as you can see, that every employee included on the E scale would be eligible to participate based on experience in the 432 plan. And I want to make sure, is that right, man? I know you're here. You're new, so this is your moment. Dr. Ward Smith, come on up. Let me hear from you. Let's get it explained. You want to introduce her again, Dr. Bell? Dr. Bell, you want to introduce the young lady?
Yes, sir. This is Ms. Brenda Hudgens, works in HR. She's her title is HR manager, and she's a very critical person in relation to these types of position amendments.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Thurman, Dr. Johnson,
Closer.
members of the board. Yes, Mr. Thurman, as you were asking, it does include psychologists, social workers, counselors are probably the largest group, and then we have media specialists, but they all are tied into that E teacher schedule. Okay.
Dr. Marley.
So my understanding is that that's at 4% increase across the board for all those people that are in that classification.
0 to 6 years.
0 to 6 years.
Yes.
Well, 0
I
to
mean,
5
6
would
and
be
That's 6 and
3.
above
6 and
years.
above.
And then the 0 to 5 years would be the 3.
That's correct.
Okay.
It's either 3 in that classification, either 3 or 4.
Now, how does that fit in as far as looking at the differentials when we look at those classifications, looking at the counselors, the media specialists, social workers, and all those people, because of the fact, psychologists, because they have to have master's degrees, and as I said at the last board meeting, the difference is we're looking at student ratio to working with those classifications. Where does that come in? When does it come about that these people will actually recognize and get the differential back that was lost some time ago?
I'll let Ms. Hudgens answer that.
Okay. The differential will, for the degree level, will be just like on the teacher schedule, you know, based on their certificate level, whether they have a master's, specialist, or doctorate. But as far as in years past, they were paid on a different scale and then did the transition to the E, and any new hires have been placed directly on the E schedule.
Too, but you have to begin to look at the fact that when you look at the ratio, and some of these counselors, social workers, and other people in the field go from different schools. They're itinerant, they're at different schools in a particular day. So when you begin to look at the classification, begin to look at the ratio of students to these people, how are we at some point, is it some point down the road that we can begin to look at this to sort of recapture this differential scale that was lost along the way? Because this is a nationwide thing. You know, when I was a school counselor, it was a differentiation also because of the fact not only the masters, but the level of contact with students that they have on any given day. So you're looking at counselor to student ratio, you're talking about 500 to sometimes 1,000 or more. And you have the media specialists, psychologists, social workers, all of those are in the same boat. So is there a point in time that we can begin to look at coming back, revisiting to make sure that the differential is taken into consideration?
I know it's not in the budget for this year, but I can certainly, it's not in the budget for this year, you know, to transfer them to another schedule, but I can certainly take that back to Dr. Smith, that we can look at that as, if the budget allows in the future.
Yeah. And also, Dr. Morley, I've had conversations with Dr. Ward Smith, who's not here tonight, relative to her concern about our comparative salary schedules as they compare to the other big districts around us. That is something Dr. Warsmith is working on. This is sort of the first step to sort of bring us back into competition with the other districts around us to increase our competitiveness in relation to attracting the best teachers.
Commend you all and the superintendent and Dr. Bell and Dr. Ward Smith for looking at this. We do have to take a first step so that we can begin to get to the next step. So thank you all very much.
Mrs. Turner.
Thank you. Dr. Bell, just want to make sure, for clarity's sake, that even though the psychologists, the social workers have been in the same classification as teachers, they will be given the same kind of raise based on their years of service. We're clear on that? Okay, good. And then also, I would like to propose that we have our auxiliary workers. You got our bus drivers, you got our cafeteria workers, you have others that have been relegated to a 2%. And so I'm proposing that in addition to our counselors, and I think that's a wonderful movement in a right direction for the counselors and social workers, but also we need to remember, if those people are not showing up to pick up those children, we have no children to service. So I think that they likewise have taken some serious hits, and we need to give consideration for their time of service to give the same across the board, the 4-3. So I wanted to see if we can put that on the table as well.
Mr. Chair, the next document, Mrs. Turner brings up a great point, and actually we've really gone further than involving them in the 432, and that's the second handout because we focus also specifically on our lowest paid employee. And if you really think about it, a 4% raise on a $10,000 a year contract is not significant. So actually we had to go beyond that in order to really have an impact on the lowest paid employees.
Yes, sir.
And
that's on the bottom of page 2 of 2.
Is that the 10?
yeah, and it should be an attachment also. Did we have that attachment?
Well, we built it in on page 2 of 2, Mr. Thurman.
Oh, okay.
which you've
Let me
seen.
go back.
Is this where the $10.25 an hour? Is that
Yes.
what you're speaking to?
Yes.
It is here on page 2.
Yes, it's
Yes.
on page 2. And of all the items, you know, obviously we're proud of being able to do more for our veteran educators. But to be quite honest with you, what we're proposing to do for our lowest paid employees is the thing I'm most proud of. Because as you stated very correctly, these are men and women who've been, quite frankly, underpaid for decades.
Far too long.
Far too long. And this is significant. And Dr. Bell, you may want to, I know you kind of alluded to it, if Ms. Turner would prefer, we can walk back through what we are doing for our lowest paid employees again. It is significant. And actually we worked on this first, because typically we leave, either we ignore them or leave them out or don't address them. We actually began first with addressing the salary needs of our lowest paid employees.
Yes, sir. As is indicated on page 2 of 2 at the bottom, in determining who the lowest paid employees are, the bus monitors are getting a $1 an hour increase, but also 5 days added to their work year for training and professional development. Okay, this is special ed grant reimbursed. Pre-K paras receiving an additional $5,000 added to their annual salary. Pre-K teachers, non-certified, is an additional $4,000 added to their annual salary. Pre-K teachers fully certified, an additional $5,000 added to their annual salary. Paraprofessional substitutes are being elevated to a level of $10.25 an hour, and that is a new minimum wage for the school system. No one working in the school system will be making less than $10.25 an hour, okay? On the school nutrition, the food service workers, assistants in that category will be given a $1 per hour increase and 3 additional work days for training and professional development. That comes from the school nutrition grant program. That's a total of an impact on the grant of about $995,000, $995,441. There is a fund balance in school nutrition of $3 to $5 million a year, and it will come out of that fund balance. Okay. Also, the food nutrition substitute is again based on the new DeKalb County minimum wage of $10.25 an hour. Bringing them up to that hourly rate will impact the school nutrition grant program $142,200. Again, easy to fund out of the fund balance in school nutrition.
What we are proposing is that DeKalb will become the first and only school district in the state of Georgia, maybe even in the country, that will establish a living wage of $10.25 for our employees. I think it sends a very, powerful message to every employee that he or she counts, that their work is appreciated, and that we're going to recognize that in the way that we compensate them, and more importantly, also by providing training and professional development. And I'm extremely proud of the work that was done to make this proposal hopefully a reality with the approval of this budget.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, Mr. Orson.
You will take it.
You want to address that about those that are over?
Well, yeah, I guess well, and I'll let you address it. I had a preliminary question before that. So so we're raising the minimum wage or the hourly wage for a certain set of employees. So I assume that takes care of the 3 or 4% for many of those employees, because it'll be in excess of that. Who's left out of the 3 or 4%, who's in the 2%? Because I think there's some sense that we may have employees who aren't highly compensated but are above that minimum who aren't participating in the 3 or 4% program.
Well, primarily be central office employees, which they would love to get a 4% raise. But also, there are some people who are not central office who are under primarily Mr. Williams' direction, but we're also eliminating a furlough day. So you have to look at it in its totality. I think if you get caught up, for instance, in giving it, if you're making $10,000 and you get a 4% raise, that's not a lot. No. You understand that?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, that doesn't, although it sounds good, it doesn't do a lot for your paycheck. And at the end of the day, we're trying to increase disposable income. Now, also you have to count the value of restored furlough days. And so for the lower paid individuals who are receiving 2%, they're also getting the return of a furlough day.
But what would be the cost to us? And that's, I know through we were trying to figure some of this out. What would be the additional cost if we took, let's put the central office to the side for a moment. We love you, but just for the moment, to the point what would be the additional cost to us to take those other employees and put them into that 3-4% scale? Because I know we've passed numbers around, but I think as we're focusing in, we need to have an idea of what that, because I think there's some sentiment for wanting to do that, but we certainly want to know what that would cost. Well,
I think we have a very comprehensive strategy, and just from the emails and the responses I've received very little, if any, in terms of people addressing the issue that you're concerned with. And I think also you have to consider the impact, hopefully, of our proposal to begin to reestablish some type of pre-tax savings plan. So what this is, in any one aspect of it, questions can be raised, but I think in fairness, in order to really understand it and appreciate it, you have to look at it in a more holistic way.
And I do understand that, and I think the discussion about retirement plan is to a certain extent a separate conversation, because we have to figure out what a retirement plan would look like and who would participate and all those things. In salary, it would be helpful for us to know that if we took those who are not currently included in the 3-4 part of the plan, what would be the additional cost if we took that subgroup that's now categorized in the 2% and included them in the 3-4%?
I don't know who's left. Maybe Dr. Bell could speak to it.
Well, you said some people in Mr. Williams' division, for example. So there are clearly some categories of employees who aren't included. Yeah.
Those employees in the central office that are at the 2%, how many furlough days do they still have?
It depends on your salary level. If you're 80,000 and below, you have 3 going to 2. If you were 80,000 and above, you had 4 going to 3. So 2 and 3. But
so looking at that, which one would be more significant? Dropping the furlough days down, or giving that, raising that 2 to 4? Is it coming out about the same?
It depends. I mean, it's 6 of one, half done the other. I mean, we can quibble on it, but at the end of the day, because the board could eliminate all furlough days. I mean, that's what we want to do. What we're trying to do is over this 3-year cycle to, as Dr. Bell stated, to rebuild our competitiveness. And we all want to do everything. But I think what has worked and has been very successful is that we look at it, the board sets goals and objectives, and the administration manages and works towards those goals and objectives. And looking at the broader picture of an $1.3 billion budget, including federal, you try to do the best you can. And like I said, some things are just personal preference, and I get that.
But it would still be helpful for us to know what that number was. I mean, I appreciate that. I appreciate the balance. I appreciate you trying to provide us some guidance. We as a board ultimately have the responsibility of approving the final budget, and I would just like to know what that number is.
Mr. Austin, let me just say, in relation to your previous question, we've answered it at the 4% across the board. That was the.
Well, that wasn't the question. So we asked in terms of a 3-4 for all categories of employees.
everybody recorded the same question when you asked it originally, and that when we answered that question at the $4,581,000. Now, let me just say this: the elimination of a furlough day, based on the working year here, is about 0.4%. So if someone is getting 2, and we take it, and they will be working on a day and getting paid for that, that's about another 0.4% increase to what their salary is. So it'll go from 2
Dr.
to
Bell,
2.4.
could you speak into the mic just a little bit, if you will? Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, should I repeat that? Okay. Well, the point I was making about the elimination of a furlough day, and Mr. Thurman alluded to it, based on our working year here, eliminating a furlough day from the impact on an employee's annual salary or take-home adds about 0.4% to that employee's salary. So if in that 2% group that you're talking about, and they will get a furlough day elimination, okay, that'll bring their incremental addition to 2.4%. Not 3, but it takes them to 2.4. Excuse me? No, sir. Not one furlough day.
It sounds like a 3 or 4 would be better than the elimination of a furlough day if you had to choose between the two.
Well, but you would also have to eliminate a furlough day for the people who supervises them. So you just can't eliminate a furlough day. You would have to do both. And part of the thinking, and I may have confused or did not hear clearly an articulation for the board, is that we wanted to direct as much funding as possible to the classroom, to the schools. I've heard it over and over and over and over again. And so this budget also tries to address this overarching concern that we hear consistently. And one of the things, if you increase the 432 plan, particularly to include central office staff, you're going to reduce the percentage that's actually going to the classroom. So, I mean, you know, when you set your goals and objectives and expectations, it's hard to turn on a dime and do something different when we try to, as best we can, live up or respond to what we hear as clear objectives from everybody on the board.
A prudent decision to have the number for us. I mean, I get that. We're not asking it in place of the salary scale. We're directing the teachers and the increases. I think we're just trying to make an informed decision, and that this is one of the variables, and that would be really useful information to have, and to be clear about how much that is, so we can make an informed decision about which of sort of the options you've placed before us we choose to go with.
Well, in the correspondence, I think Dr. Bell responded to the first as it relates to if everybody went to 4%. That's correct. The second was that if everybody goes to the 4.32% based on years of experience.
4.3. So that was, is that the 2.5 million figure, give or take?
I think so, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I had a question.
And if everyone goes to the 4.3, there would be no 2. So that meant that everyone, including everyone who's employed, superintendent, everyone, at least Deputy Dan, would benefit from the 4 and 3.
Unless we cap it.
Question.
Yeah, but you're late in the game, Mr. Orson.
Dr. Marley, then Mrs. Turner.
Mr. Orson, I'm a little confused because I'm hearing one thing, but what you're asking for as far as the figures are concerned, because if we're looking at we've gotten the figures for the 4.3, can you clarify what you're asking for of Dr. Bell at this particular time?
Who qualifies for the 2%?
What I've asked throughout, since we've had our last board meeting, is what would be the additional cost, sort of the top figure, if we extended the 4.3 program to all classifications of employees. And that's before then we might put any limitations on it. But we've been asking, I'm not the only one who's asked that, we've been asking that question since the last board member. So there are certain categories of employees who will either not participate in the 4.3 part of the 4.3 program, or won't benefit by the minimum wage that the superintendent has proposed. We know, for example, we'll just keep picking on Josh, that there appear to be people in Josh's areas that are already above that minimum wage, but aren't in the classification for the 3%. So I'm just trying to get an idea of what the cost would be to the system. If we did that before, we might put limitations on it, and I think Ms. Turner may have some ideas around that also. But I'd like to know sort of what our maximum exposure would be. Again, that's just part of so that we can be prudent in making a final decision about this.
I think that we responded to 2 questions, and I'm not sure what the other questions might be.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
We did respond to a 4-3 option at 2.6. Now, you've kind of qualified it now by saying just for a lower paid group of people. Our original response in the original question was taking everybody to the 4-3.
To 4 what?
To 4-3.
Yeah, we didn't look at, capping it at certain individuals. That was not the question.
Right.
Less than the maximum. So that just tells us our maximum exposure. If everybody participated to the point you were making, we know it would cost us $2.6 million above what you put into the budget. Is that correct? You put 23 point. Yes.
Yes, sir.
So if we put limitations on that, right? We start at the worst, or what the maximum exposure is, then it would cost us less than 2.6 million. If we, so I just wanted to know what our maximum exposure was, so that we could then make a more informed decision about if we wanted to extend the 4-3 to additional classifications, and how much, if we did it to everybody, how much it would cost, and if we did it to some subgroup. We know it would be less than that.
Mrs. Turner?
Am I clear, Dr. Bell, that central office is exempt from these raises? The entire staff of the central office is exempt from these raises. Am I clear about that?
That's not correct.
No.
Okay, can you come closer? I can't hear you.
Yeah, excuse me. The central office staff will fall under the 2% increase under this proposal.
Thank you.
Mr. Jester?
Yeah, I'd like to put these conversations in a better context. And at the end of the day, our goal here is to educate children. And every conversation we have, 432, 4343, whatever it is, we should be asking ourselves, which one will help us educate children better? I just wanted to make sure that we had the appropriate context for this. Thanks.
Dr. Morley, followed by Dr. Irwin.
Us to be clear that even though we have this money that's out there, the $80 million and all of that, that most certainly, unless you're constantly putting something in, we can't keep taking it out. And we have to also be careful too, it's paper. So it's not like we have this vault that we're going in and taking all this money out. So as we do predictability, making sure that we do what needs to be done, and I agree with Mr. Jester that the overall goal is that making sure that we educate our children. We pay the people who are working hard to be able to educate our children and pay them their value and their worth. I think that's the major point. And we might not be able to get there today to get everybody back, but my belief is that we have a plan that will exercise that direction to make sure that at some point soon, we go there. So I think we do have to make that start. And looking at where we are, getting rid of the furlough days, all those things like that, and do it as much as we possibly can, but being careful that we don't go in and overly extend and overspend what is there, but it's not there where you just have it in a vault and taking it out like that. And I think that's very important. So I think that we want to make sure, as Mr. Jester said, that we actually remunerate the people for what they're doing. Might not be at the level of where we believe they should be, but I think it's a great step that we move in that direction.
Dr. Irwin?
Dr. Bell, quick question about the 200 additional teachers that we're putting into the budget. Is that coming from my FY2016 projected QBE growth?
Yes, sir.
Now, is there any schools in the district that did not earn new teachers this year?
Dr. Preston is here, and he is closer to that than I am.
Okay, thank you.
It's about 200 teachers, and he can speak to that.
Good evening.
Good evening.
To answer your question there are some schools that will not be gaining additional teachers because some schools probably didn't go up in enrollment or didn't increase in FTEs. So the two main things that will cause a school to grow in staff would be gaining additional FTEs or gaining additional enrollment. So if they didn't do either one of those two things, then in most of our elementary, middle, and high, they're close to the minimum class sizes. So that's why they would not gain additional staff.
Okay. Last week, I think it was last Wednesday or Thursday, I asked for that detailed information on where those teachers would be distributed, and I hadn't seen it yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. It didn't come back across.
Yeah. It was received.
It wasn't received?
Yes.
It was
sent in
received?
an email. Yes, sir.
It was sent back?
Could you all get a copy? Because this is a very detailed chart.
Okay.
High school, middle school, and elementary, with each school delineating how many new teachers each school will be granted. Could you all get Dr.
Can you send it to me again?
Yes, sure.
I appreciate it.
If you can get a hard copy.
I would love a hard copy.
Yeah, get a hard copy. He did a great job, Dr. Urban, actually, based on your request.
Not a problem.
I appreciate that.
Anytime.
But yeah, I was looking for it. Maybe I overlooked it, but thank you for sending me that information.
Not a problem.
Now, one more question before you step down.
Dr. Preston almost had a heart attack up here. You know that, don't you?
So let's say that I'm at one of those schools that didn't receive a new teacher.
Okay.
Is there any way the district can facilitate that school getting a new teacher?
Well, what you have to look at is that in every grade level, a teacher must have a certain amount of students in every grade level in order to earn that teacher. So in other words, let's say kindergarten. The board approved, well actually state funding says you have to have 21 kindergartners in a classroom in order for that teacher to fund. If you are going below that, then that teacher is not funding, which would cause a deficit to the district. So if a school, which our school levels, kindergarten, they're at 21. So if you have that 21, then gaining additional teachers and it doesn't qualify for enrollment and it doesn't qualify for FTE, then that's where that school would have a tough time gaining those additional teachers. Now, if they were Title I, they could, because then it would be above and beyond, because the district will give you every single staff member, every single teacher that you need per your enrollment, per your FTE.
So, and I guess the point that I'm trying to make, if I'm in that situation where I did not earn a teacher, and the Title I dollars have been spent, and we went through this before,
yes,
and I want to pilot a new program, and let's say I require a coach, how do I go about getting the money for that coach?
Academic coach?
Yeah.
That can only be funded through Title I.
Only be funded through Title I?
That can academic coach can only be funded
What
through
if I need
Title
a new math teacher?
If you need another math teacher, then we have protocols that you can go through and request that. But what we cannot do, we cannot put that teacher in a sense to where you can't earn the next year. And if we continue to do that with 7, 8, let's say elementary schools, we're going to put the district at a deficit. So what we try to do is to be fair and to do those things. Now, one of the things that we can look at doing is maybe looking at the funding size. And as a board, you can look at lowering that funding size. So if you lower that funding size, then that will add additional teachers to that. Now, that is a cost, to the budget, but that is something that you can look at. So when you have if you have a very small school, it is hard. At some point in time, you're going to tap out of your earnings.
Right. Okay, last thing.
Yes.
I can't wait for the tutorial that you give us on QBE and how to get these teachers funded in the school.
I would love to do that.
Please, let's set up that date. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
You've done a great job.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Preston, you said that using the example of the kindergarten class, the cutoff being 21. Let's just say for the sake of example, you have 23 kids. You're saying that another teacher will be assigned to that school for the kindergarten class?
No, we were talking about minimums. Now we're going into maximums. So the maximum that a class can have is 24. We have a +2 go up to 26. So let's say if you started out the year and we look at your projections and it says that 24 kids will be in each one of those classrooms. Well, we know right there, there's no need to start out with 24 kids in class at the max. We will go ahead and put another teacher in there because there's no need to wait until you go over that max and we're in October, and then we can't hire a quality teacher in October. So we go ahead and put that teacher in the classroom. We do not let our classes go over the max, and I'll tell you why. For one, two reasons. It's too many kids in the class, number one. Number two, we can't let it go over the max because for the one kid going over the maximum class size, we lose funding for every single child in that classroom.
A great answer. What I'd like to know is, have you compiled a report, and perhaps it's what Dr. Irwin has asked, does it include the maximum size allowable by grade level? Do we have that data? I'd like to look at that, because, and the reason I'm asking is because that is a complaint. In many classrooms, it is a complaint among our parents that there are too many. Now, I do understand that a parent's perspective may be very different from what it needs to be, but there is a complaint, an ongoing concern, and that's a better word, that there are too many children in a class, and it is affecting the quality of learning. And so that's why I would like to see what is the max. And I love the fact that you say we don't wait until they max out at 26. But when we see 24, we're doing something. We're being proactive. So that's good. So thank you for that.
And when we do that, when I get a chance to present to you how we fund extra classes, you will see that we fund them on the minimum. Now, however, if you see something in a school where they're at, let's say, I would like to use grades 1 through 3 because that's a better disparity. So the minimum is 23, okay? And so the maximum is 27 with a +2 at 29. Well, however, we fund that school off of 23. So now let's say if the class size is at 23, that's what we give the school. Now the school has autonomy to use their allotments in however way they see fit. So if the school is allotted on 23, well, they say, you know, I can tweak my class size up a little bit and go 25 because I want to get a STEM teacher. That is up to the individual school. But how we fund the school is off the minimum class size.
When you describe the scenario such as that, that means that you've given that autonomy to a principal.
Yes.
Which may impact what is going on in that classroom, and that classroom teacher who is dealing with the brunt of that is weighted down with a decision that is being made, and they're not included in that process. Am I right?
And I would hope they would be included in that process. I really would.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Preston. The one more thing, Dr. Johnson, please.
Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
The other thing is I wanted to say, and it's not for you, dear. Thank you. If we are increasing, if we're allowing our teachers, and this is to Mr. Jester, make sure I'm clear on this, if we're giving our teachers the raises, that impacts the 65% rule. Am I right? So then that is going into the classrooms, and that puts us close to compliance, closer to compliance than we were the previous year. Am I right? Thank you. So that's a good thing.
Okay, Mr. Jester, followed by Mr. Orson, and then I will ask the question.
Yes, ma'am. I'm always looking for money into the classroom. And you were looking for the max class sizes, and there's a good blog out there. Matter of fact, it's one that I write, and I discuss the class size and the max class sizes. I'm happy to sign you up for that and make sure you get that. And I'm sorry, Dr. Preston, can I ask you a question? I'm sorry. The minimum class funding size, has that changed any for this year?
No, sir. Not since that would have to be board approved. That was done when I arrived in DeKalb County, 2000.
If we were to do something like that, is that during the budget cycle or is that some other cycle? The budget cycle?
It would have to be in the budget cycle because let's say if you wanted to lower that, let's say in the elementary, you're actually looking at possibly adding one teacher in every single grade level in every single school, which would be a budgetary impact.
Gotcha. And max class sizes, do we anticipate that changing any this year?
And the thing is, dealing with max class sizes, we've kept it the same since I've been here. However, if you look at, and I was saying you this too, if you look at from the time from 2012 to this projected school year, it has dropped. So in other words, it impacts a whole lot of other things when you drop that max class size. Now, we have that max class size there in case, let's say on FTE day, we're very transient. And if kids show up and it goes over that number, we drop that number and it goes over, we lose funding for every single kid in that class. So even though that number is there, that is not a practice. It is there to protect the district in case we see some unforeseen enrollment hike that is there before we can come and make that adjustment and hire that new teacher. that protects us. But we don't, for instance, we had 36, but we practice trying to keep it at 32 in the high schools, 34 in the high schools. That's what we practice.
So our max class size and practice and actuality will be slowly dropping, yes, although the actual waiver will be yes, above that. Yes. And that's mainly just to protect ourselves.
Absolutely.
Understood.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And you'll see that in our class size resolution when we present that to you.
All right.
And Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Justice's point, over the last 2 fiscal years, assuming this budget is adopted, we will have added 300.
Almost 500.
Really? 500?
Yes, we've almost put back. When all the teachers were cut, we've almost put all those teachers back, plus gain revenue.
Say it again for Dr. Preston, so we can make sure
teachers were cut. Teachers were cut. We have replaced.
Don't whisper. Speak loudly, so we.
Teachers that were cut, we have replaced almost all of those teachers while gaining revenue. That is because of scheduling. The API is doing a great job. The principal's doing a great job. The leadership of giving them autonomy, letting them do those types of things. That is the turnaround that is needed. And we still have a lot of work to do, but it's on the right track. It's real on the right track.
Okay. Mr. Orson, then I'll ask a question, and then Mrs. Turner.
Okay. Still with you. So I just want to, because I think this, I know we'll perhaps have another session, but I think it's important because I think some terms get thrown around. The minimum class size, and therefore how we fund our individual schools, is a byproduct of kind of the rules of the road we develop in DeKalb County. The maximum class size are a product of the state Board of Education rules and whatever waiver we have. And so the reason why going over the maximum is they're hard caps and then they jeopardize our funding. But we're really funded on a per student basis on an aggregate basis. So the fact that classroom A has 20 and classroom B has 22, the state looks at us as having 42 kindergartners, yes, not 1 at 20 and not 1 at 22. And I think that, and the only reason I raise that is historically, we've had an issue in the county in which we have confused sort of our decisions about how we fund classes with the state rules that govern it. And I think it introduces a lot of confusion and misconceptions. And I think at some point it's going to be really important, not only for us, but for the public, because otherwise we're going to take a step backward. That it's the difference between we've chosen how we're going to fund from the monies we've earned from the state plus our own local funds to allocate it to the schools based on a set of numerical criteria and other criteria that we establish. And the maximums are really kind of the upper level what the state says we can do without then jeopardizing monies that they give us because they have set a hard. Would that be a correct characterization? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Orson. I would like to ask our superintendent a question, and that question, Mr. Superintendent, what was your rationale for excluding, relative to teachers now, excluding the teachers from 0 to 5 years to 3 rather than putting them in the 4% category? Because the objective is to retain teachers and to send the right message. It appears to me that for teachers, that 1% could make a difference in retaining teachers versus them going someplace else. What was your rationale?
No, that was a great question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, first of all, the key in budgets, working with Dr. Bell and others, speak. They're numbers, but they have a narrative associated with them. And if we look at this budget year, based on from day one when we all arrived here, the first thing we had to do was to restore some competitiveness in our salary structure, particularly as it related to veteran teachers. If you look at our salary scale, and I'm sorry Dr. Ward Smith is not here, but her assistant can speak to this, DeKalb is extremely competitive in terms of new teacher salaries. There was an article in the AJC about 3 weeks ago, and they did a comparison of Metro Atlanta in terms of salary scale for new teachers. And I was surprised to realize that DeKalb has the third highest starting salary for new teachers in Metro Atlanta. APS is first, Cherokee County is second, and we're third. The challenge for DeKalb has not been in terms of salaries for new teachers. And Mr. Orson and I, we've talked about it before. Our problem over the years, for whatever reason, we've hollowed out our salary structure beginning in year 5. That's when we dropped to number 7 or 8 in Metro Atlanta. So part of the 4-3 philosophy was that we wanted to maintain our priority position for new teachers so that we can hire and be more competitive. But what we were really losing was after that 5th year, teachers were going to other districts simply because they were able to qualify for $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 more. That was the rationale between the 4 and the 3. The need was not there for the new teacher, but it was a definite need as related to veteran teachers. And quite frankly, we just wanted to send a message to say we care. We recognize it. This doesn't fix the problem, but we recognize and understand and appreciate the fact of what you're doing. So that was the thinking about it, that we really don't have a problem with new teacher salaries in terms of competition with other districts.
Thank you for that explanation.
No, it was a great question, Mr. Chairman.
Mrs. Turner?
This report that we've just received, I'm assuming this is from Dr. Preston? Okay. So there is another report that will come that show what the minimum and the maximum caps are for the student in the classroom. The other thing is, I want to say this, Dr. Preston, and you don't have to get up, is I think that the average parent doesn't understand formulas, FTE, QBE. I think I've said this. And you are quite knowledgeable and you understand the whys of things, that by placing more students in, we lose something. All parents are looking at is outcomes, and you know that. And so I'm going to suggest one thing. I'm going to have a town hall meeting soon, and I'd love for you to be there, because we've got to get this information, break it down to our parents that they understand what the rhyme and the reason is for the decisions that are made. And also, while I understand what you've shared today, when I think of 32 kids in a classroom, having taught, having had a school, I knew the reason why I didn't have turnover is because I always recognized when I was taking a teacher over the edge if I gave her one more student, and I always took that into consideration. I couldn't imagine, and I don't have a problem managing children, I'm very good at it, but I wouldn't even be able to do it with 31 high school children in a classroom, and I think we really do need to give some attention to that if we want to be successful and increase our graduation rate.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry.
Mr. Thurman, and then Mr. Jester, followed by Dr. Marley.
One of the things, this document that, first I want to thank Dr. Preston. This young man has done an outstanding job in terms of creating order out of the chaos and allotments, and much of the revenue enhancement and growth was primarily due to working with Dr. Thompson School leadership and other principals and teachers of really being able to earn the revenues that we actually have qualified for, but we just didn't have the organization in place to do it. You will notice on this chart, I wanted to speak to Dr. Irwin. If you look at where the growth is, if we were asking about adding new teachers, it's something we talked about last board meeting. Look at the schools that are earning the greatest number of teachers. And these are the schools that have the highest percentage of Hispanic students. That's where the growth is in the district. And that's why our strategy around the Cross Keys cluster is so important. This is just another indication of what we were seeing in terms of student population growth. And they are earning more teachers, and that's where the teachers are having to be allocated. Adding 8.5 teachers in one elementary school in 1 year is significant. That tells you something, Mr. Justice. It really does. That and it's an issue that must be addressed. It's not going to abate. It's going to become much more significant in the next 3 to 5 years.
Mr. Jester?
I agree. Our biggest bang for the buck is in the classroom, so I'm always happy to see money spent in the classroom. Dr. Bell, the detailed budget online, does that reflect this budget that we have in our hands? The 2,000-page detailed budget online?
Yeah, I see.
Do you know the 2,000-page detailed budget that I'm talking about?
That's online right now does not reflect these changes that are proposed, these minor changes really that are proposed with the E-scale.
Okay, because the one that's online refers to McNair College and Career Academy. There's $1 million for that in there. And I assume we don't need that anymore.
We'll check into it.
No, actually we do. We're going forward with McNair College and Career Academy. As a matter of fact, and I saw an email earlier today, there's some confusion about that. I think Dr. Thompson has posted a position for the dean for the College and Career Academy. So we're moving forward. We met with business leaders 2 weeks ago. We have a strategy in place, and there's confusion, but it shouldn't be. This plan is on track and moving forward.
You mentioned earlier that we're no longer pursuing charter designation at this time for that academy.
Well, number two, of course, we have a proposal to convert to a charter system, so all of our schools will be charter schools. It's hopefully when that is approved, but also the charter designation was to qualify for a state grant. The school does not have to be a charter school, so we're moving forward, and it was not dependent upon winning the state grant from the Department of Technical and Adult Education.
All right, well, I guess the charter discussion can be tabled for a minute here.
Yeah, I think we can talk about it next month. That's what I would prefer. Absolutely. You know, people say things, and I don't ever know where they originate from, but I'm very excited. We met with at least 10 business leaders who's serving on the advisory board. We had members there from the Department of Technical and Adult Education, and we have a plan in place that I think is going to be unique. And what they confuse the whole notion by is qualifying for the grant, and any school can become a college and career academy. You don't necessarily have to be a charter school in order to do it.
Okay, we'll have that conversation another day.
In July.
You got it. Fair enough.
I'm available for any and all conversations.
All right. So the detailed budget is not up to date, so we haven't seen that most recent one. And this was given to us today, so you can understand that it kind of challenges us to prepare appropriately for the budget conversations with little or no notice with these things. But this year we are spending just about every dime we're taking in, more or less. I would ask Mr. Thurman, in your opinion, how much would it take to adequately educate our children? Let me rephrase that question. So 3 years ago, we increased the appropriations by a few million. A year after that, we increased it by $30 million. And this year, it's increased by, what, $60 million. So it seems like we just grow and grow and grow. And I think from 2001 to 2008, central office in and of itself expanded by 150%. General admin expenditures increased by 150% per child. So I'm just concerned that we're doing it again. So I was wondering, are we just going to keep growing, or what is that ideal, that budget?
That's a great question. I can't speak to central office growth through 2008. Any growth that has occurred since 2012 has been extremely minimal. I can speak to the superintendent's suite, and the people who were there the day I walked in are the same people who are there today. There's been no growth in my department. Now, you have to consider that the DeKalb County overall population is growing as well. And the good news is that we were in a period of declining growth up through 2012, and in more recent years we've seen the population continue to grow, and that's a positive thing. So it's not an apples to oranges or apples to apples comparison. Now I think in terms of quality, you say, well, how much does it take? The journey to academic growth and achievement is not an event, it's a journey, and it's a journey that particularly the journey that includes providing at least the technical opportunity for every child, regardless of color or race or class, to have access to a quality education is a very recent experiment here in the United States of America. We're only into the second generation of this effort. After centuries and decades of an education system that was either prohibited or restricted or intentionally underfunded. So this is a relatively new concept that we're experimenting with. So how do you determine whether or not you're doing well? First, you look at graduation rates. In DeKalb County, over the last 2 years, our graduation rate has improved by 5%. This is significantly higher than the overall improvement statewide. To me, that's a sign that we're moving in the right direction on this journey. Our standardized test scores, if you look at the standardized test score for CRCT, EOCT, our students improved both years on those tests. So to your point, Mr. Jester, I think that the investments that are being made are being managed much more effectively. I think that we have a higher quality education that's being offered. And I think the objective data suggests that we're doing things not perfectly, but much more effectively and with much greater success than they've been in the past. So those dollars, if in fact we are growing the budget, I think the outcomes are beginning to manifest themselves in a positive way.
But we are putting it into some of it goes into the central office, so some of this growth, because it's not all going into the classroom, right?
Well, no, it doesn't all go in the classroom, but if graduation rates are going, that means that somebody in the central office is doing something correctly. That means that their board members making good decisions. I think we do ourselves a disservice, to be honest with you. And as I sit here and with the chairman's discretion, you know, this battle fight between central office and schools, I think is wasted effort, to be quite honest with you. Everyone has to work together. It's what was stated earlier. What we've tried to do in this administration is to recognize that every employee is important, whether you work in the central office or whether you're a bus driver or a food service worker or a teacher. It takes a collaborative effort from top to bottom. We can't be successful unless each and every one of us make a positive contribution, and that's the focus that I've had, and I think it's played a significant role as to why we're moving now in a more positive direction.
I might add before...
Dr. Johnson, may I?
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I thought you were finished.
Yeah, so my concern is that just like the growth through 2008, now we have an influx of money, and as you know, it's cyclical. So the central office is growing, as well as the teacher, the money spent for teachers. But what happens when it goes back down? Just like 2008, we wring our hands and we say it's extremely difficult to find the money. Where did the money go? How do we go back down? And I would just assume that we not go up.
Well, and let's go to lunch sometimes, so we can have a more, rather than belabor this in front of the audience here. But that's why you build your fund balance. This is why it's so important. Our #1 priority coming in when we were in deficit was to restore the fund balance and to protect it with a vengeance. And that's why I know sometimes you all grow frustrated with me and administration when we suggest, well, maybe we can't do it. You have to protect the fund balance. What really brought DeKalb to the brink of fiscal ruin was that when the recession came in 08 and 09, we had squandered the fund balance primarily in finance and legal fees and lawsuits that we couldn't afford. And so when we needed to draw some money from the fund balance to maintain the operation, we couldn't do it. And the reason that happened, because people who sat in my seat and sitting in these seats made bad fiscal decisions and almost led us to the point where we lost the district. And I would hope that history, we've learned from it, and we will not repeat it. That's why you must at all costs protect your fund balance first and foremost. There are many things we want to do and even could do, but you know, like I know, and you make a great point, the recession is already cooked in the books. It's already been determined, and we might be in it today because the economists only know after the fact when it started. The reality is that this recession or some other unforeseen consequence, legal and otherwise, could bring us back to a point where we don't have money to pay our bills.
Our fund reserve balance is more for, I look at it for emergencies and not just for dips in the cycle of the economy. I would prefer that we didn't use that as a mechanism to flatten out our appropriations. I think a better mechanism is our variable millage rate, and unfortunately that is just about tapped out, although I guess that's a conversation we're going to have shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Before Dr. Marley, it may be helpful, Mr. Superintendent, in the future if we define central office, because over the years, central office have been interpreted in many, many ways. People have been put in the category of central office who are really not in central office. So for clarity purposes, I think it will be necessary for proper communication to the board. When we speak of central office, let's define it and making sure we identify those individuals who are in central office. Then we're comparing apples to apples then.
That's a great point. And let me tell you one of the things that shocked me. I call a meeting of all central office staff. So I expected to walk in to thousands of people sitting there, and it was a handful of folk. I read the same blogs, I read the same stuff, so I'm looking for all of my troops that operate out the central office, and I get in there, and it's a handful of people. And no matter how many times you say it, to Dr. Johnson's point, or try to help people understand it, there's this narrative that will not go away, and it's just, and I'm still looking for them. Maybe they hiding out somewhere. I'm going to do one last tour of this building before I leave. I know they're in here somewhere. I just hadn't been able to meet them or talk to them or figure out who the heck they are. One thing, they're good at hiding out. If they're on the payroll, I hadn't seen them.
Is the people of the state declares general administration. We may classify them, but the state classifies them as general administration.
That's why I said they need to be identified.
Right. And I'm saying it should be congruent with the state, the way they identify it.
Because some of Mr. Williams' folks, I understand, I actually quote central. Is that right? So tell us who are some of the people classified, if you don't mind, because this is a good conversation at central office. But
they need to be identified so that when we ask the question, we should. Oh, yeah.
So, for example, under the operations division, all of my maintenance department is classified as central office.
Classified by who?
As part of the district's effort relative to central office.
I know, but who classifies that? Is that the state classification or is that our classification?
Also, our transportation department, bus drivers are classified as central office. That's roughly about 850 staff members alone just in transportation that's classified as such. Food service as well is classified as central office. So what I'm saying is practically all of operations is considered central office.
Understandably.
But they don't all wear ties and make $150,000 a year.
But they're not in the classroom.
You finished? Okay. Dr. Morrow?
had to really regroup and say, what was I going to say? It's been going on. It seemed like we strayed away from what we were supposed to be on the topic of. But I'm a former administrator, and I think that we have to begin to look at it. I think it behooves us as a board and the community to get to know more about what's at central office, who's at central office, what's in the school, and all those things that come about. It takes a village to be able to educate a child the same way it does to raise a child, and I think we have to be realistic. We have to begin to learn that it's important to pay people their value and their worth. We can't keep saying, you know, you get a master's, you get a doctorate degree, you don't want to pay people, something is wrong with that. But then we can play, and you've heard me say this over and over, the basketball player, the football player, nothing against them, because people see that they are a lot more important than teachers, administrators, and everything else. Someone has to administrate. You know, when I heard that the president of Delta makes $17 million a year, and then we're still flying, paying for all the bags and all the things that's going on, but we don't want to give teachers what they're due. I think that when we look at it, we've got to educate people, and sort of looking at what Ms. Turner was saying, is that we have a parent engagement department, and a lot is going on there, and I think it would behoove the board to become connected with that parent engagement office to help educate, bring in people who can help educate, not just from the district, but I was in the Education Policy Fellowship Program where there are people at the state level, people out there who breaks this information down for parents so that they can understand it in simple terms. But I think the other thing is that we've got to get parents to come out, be interested enough, and then we need to correct some of the information that's going out that might not be accurate about class sizes, about other things. And so one of the things that I try to do as a board member is when I'm talking with my people in the community or wherever they are, they might not be my direct constituents, is to help educate them and help them to do the research that they need to have so that they're speaking accurately about what's going on. So I'd like for us to get back to the budget, make a decision about where we're going with this budget so we won't keep belaboring the point.
Dr. Irwin, followed by Mrs. Turner.
I don't know, Ms. Turner might want to go first, because all I'm going to do is call for the vote.
I agree with you. It is important to call for the vote, but I think even more importantly, we should be very clear on what we're voting on. And so I apologize if I've belabored any points, but it's important. I have 3 questions, actually, and so I'll put them all out here at the same time, Dr. Bell, and I think that you may be able to answer them for me. The last one, I may need a bodyguard to go out of here. Where do the principals, the school principals, fit in the 4-3? Because we've said teachers, but we weren't sure, but it hadn't been mentioned, so I wanted to know where principals fit in that. Are they the 4-3? They're part of the 4-3 as well?
That's correct, yes, ma'am.
Based on tenure? Okay, thank
That's
you.
correct.
I understand it's there. Thank you. And then you just brought up an issue about the ambiguity of central office designation. If bus drivers are considered a part of central office, what will their raises really be?
The bus drivers, with the exception of the monitors, which are in the lowest paid category step-ups, will get the 2%.
2? I thought back about 30 minutes ago, maybe 40, we said auxiliary workers, which I included, auxiliary to mean bus drivers would get the 4-3. And I thought that that was answered in the affirmative, so
No.
this is why we need to be clear.
Yeah, HR is indicating, no, they're not in the auxiliary group.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
Dr. Bell, I can't hear.
I'm sorry, they're not in the auxiliary group, and so the bus drivers will be considered central office at 2%.
But last year, of course, we did something for the bus drivers. See, you can't look at it in one year, because some people benefited in a way last year that others might benefit this year, because we added back, what did we add back, a day? What was that, Byron? Yeah, we added back. And we gave them, yeah.
Mr. Superintendent, we added back an hour to the workday.
The hour to the workday.
So auxiliary, and that may be a term for me. Auxiliary workers will not be considered 4% or 3% raises.
Based on?
Auxiliary being bus drivers, bus monitors. Again, we said if they don't drive the children to school, you have no one to service. And I thought that,
No.
is it just me?
Yeah, the confusion with the lowest paid workers, one of the things you have to, it's surprising the bus drivers are not among the lowest paid workers.
I'm confused, okay.
We focused on the lowest paid workers. Bus monitors.
Bus monitors, yes.
Speaking to Mike,
The bus monitors.
Bus monitors, let's go back to page 2.
I'm looking at bus monitors, I see $1.
Bus monitors, pre-K paras, pre-K teachers, fully certified, non-certified, paraprofessional substitutes, food and nutrition workers, assistants, and substitutes are the lowest paid workers in the district. Some of those individuals made $9,000 a year, which is significantly less than what bus drivers make.
I'm sorry, Dr. Bell, Mr. Thurman, I just understood something very different in the previous discussion tonight.
Apologize for that.
I'm not saying that I've accepted your explanation, but I just thought that we saw that there was a need to include them in the 4-3. The final question I have is, was any consideration given to those that are making over $100,000? That would be principals and our teachers. Those that are making over $100,000, to remove them from the raises for this budget year coming up, so that we can really impact those who are on the low end of the totem pole. They're not at poverty wages, they're not at minimum wage, but those that are impacting our children in the classroom, and there's a big disparity. Is there a possibility that we can remove those that are making over $100,000, and we have many of those, out of the 4-3 equation for this budget year?
So are you suggesting that we amend the budget? Is that what you're asking?
That's what I'm asking.
Well, to that point, the largest percentage of people making over $100,000 actually work in the central office, which is why we restricted them to the 2%, to your point.
We do have some in the schools as well, though. Am I right, principals? No.
But
we do have some principals, according to the budget report that I reviewed. Am I right?
But I really don't think, to your point, though, we look at who's really getting the work done, and depending on years of experience and qualification, there may be some, but that's totally a subjective kind of analysis. And at a point in a time where we're trying to focus on school and school leadership, it was our determination that we focus on those individuals who are in the schools, who are providing the leadership and providing the instruction. And we didn't really look at who was making $100,000 or more in the schools. That's never been a concern raised up until this point.
Well, Mr. Thurman, that's why I was saying I might need a bodyguard going out, because I just think it's worthy of consideration when we have teachers in there who need to have these raises, and principals who are making a good, adequate wage. And I talked over this with my colleagues, and so we all were in agreement that that needed to be given some consideration. The only one I didn't get to speak with, I just had one I didn't get to speak with, but.
And then maybe I need to speak to that, because I did not get that information. I have a real problem with that. I have a real problem with that, and I cringed when I heard it, because, you know, you have people in the schools, they've worked, they've earned their way, and we can't go by money, and it just bothers me when we start looking at educators. As I say, we don't look at anybody else but educators. These people are giving their very lives teachers and anybody, if they've earned their ways, if somebody didn't get a doctorate degree, didn't get a specialist degree, a master's degree, that's on them. Everybody had the same opportunity. And so I'd like to see if they've earned their ways, they get paid. We have a principal, Mr. Goodwin, who just retired after 30 years, and a shame and a disgrace on DeKalb County because this man was never paid the money he should have been paid. He worked hard. Mr. Goodwin was there 12, 13, 15, 16 hours a day, Saturday and Sunday. And we let him walk out of DeKalb County because somewhere in that infinite wisdom back in the day decided that he would not be equated and given what he justly deserved. There were elementary principals, people who came in after Mr. Goodwin that were making much more money than him. So when we start looking at how much people make, if they can make 100, if they're making 150, if the raise is going to be a raise, it should be for those that actually earn it, and that's anybody who works. I just cannot go along with that because of the fact that we can't look at the money. We need to look at the merit and look at where people are, the fact that they're here, that everybody deserves to have a raise and not based on what they make. Because you may see a person making it, you may see that paycheck, but you don't know what's going on in their house. You don't know what's happening in that house. And I think we judge people by the car they drive, the paycheck we believe that they have, the clothes they wear, and the degrees that they have and think that they have money. And that's not always so. You never know what's going on with the person. So I would most certainly disagree with looking at what a person is making and deciding whether they're part of that raise or not.
I have one more comment. I do believe that a workman is worthy of their hire. I do. Having been a principal, a headmaster, I was the last one to get paid because I thought it was more important to pay my teachers because they're in the trenches and they're working with those children. I'm not dismissing the value that principals bring to this organization and our school district. I applaud their efforts, but I do believe those that have suffered the most have been those that are in the classroom, overworked, too many children, and underpaid. Thank you.
The question I would raise, if we amended the budget to exclude the 100, those principals who are making more than 100,000, that would also decrease the amount of monies in the schoolhouse, would it not, Mr. Bell, Dr. Bell?
Yes.
If you're asking, would it impact the 65% target calculation?
Yes.
Okay. I think it would.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, in all due respect, I understand and appreciate Mrs. Turner's thoughts, but we have to consider what you setting up a scenario where we're trying to retain our most veteran, highly qualified educators, teachers and administrators. So what we don't want, what I would hate to see, is that some of our most veteran, highly qualified people leave the county to go to other districts. What we've done and what we on, I think the threshold of doing is breaking a long-term trend that has existed in the DeKalb County School District. We have put our veteran, highly qualified educators first in the schoolhouse. This is what everyone has said that they wanted to see happen. So we're at the point of making that happen. And I can only encourage this board to go ahead and make this decision. It's the right thing to do. It's what we have said we wanted to do. We want the money, Mr. Justice, in the schoolhouse. This is the moment. This is the opportunity to do it. And there is no reason, I think, to delineate or even discriminate against schoolhouse personnel based on their salary, with all due respect to my good friend, Mrs. Turner.
Mr. Chairman?
I would like to ask Dr. Smith, though, in terms of our principal salaries, how would it compare to other systems in terms of principal salaries?
Dr. Johnson, that is a concern, just like teachers, our principal salaries.
Can you speak a little louder?
Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Just like teachers, our principal salaries, we need to become more competitive. We have had principals or applicants interview and not accept positions at the principal level because of salary.
Can you kind of tell us say for instance, Atlanta, how much is the average salary for principals, or would you know?
Unfortunately, I don't have that information memorized like Dr. Smith would, but I can certainly check on that and provide that.
Okay. Thank you.
And to your point, Dr. Johnson, we are decentralizing our regional superintendent network. The principals are becoming much more critical, along with regional superintendents, in driving instruction, academic growth, and achievement. It would undercut this entire effort that we're putting in place, along with the grant from the Wallace Foundation, to actually, you want your highest paid people to be principals. That's where you're going. That's the movement, and I think that's really the shape of public education. To Mr. Jester's point, if it's not central, then it has to be what? School. And you want your principals to be some of the highest paid people, because then the way that public education is set up, has been for centuries, it's not a DeKalb issue, is that if you want to aspire to a higher salary, the only place you could get it is where? At the central office. So that meant your highest qualified people, your most dedicated people who wanted to pursue a higher salary, had no choice but to leave the schoolhouse and come to the central office. We are trying to reverse this migration from the schoolhouse to the central office so that men and women who desire and have the ability can support their families and remain at the schoolhouse level. That is what you want to really create. That's the synergy that Mr. Jester talks about, and I suspect in the next 10 to 15 years, and I've said this in front of teachers and others, our highest paid individuals should actually be at the schoolhouse and not the other way around.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I'd like to revise an answer I gave previously. My staff tells me the principals are not in the numerator of the 65% calculation. They would be in the denominator. But to the extent that you keep the denominator smaller, you could be helping the 65%. But previously, the HR representative, Ms. Hudgens, has indicated that they have difficulty hiring principals already at the salary scales we're paying. And so the HR advice is do not cap that.
Okay.
And to Mr. Thurman's point, if I can be recognized, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Yes. See, Mr. Orson, Dr. Marley, then Mr. Jester.
I'm already up.
He's already up.
Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
All right. So to Mr. Thurman's point, flipping the paradigm around is definitely something we need to look into. I would call it the university model, where everybody strives to be a professor. Everybody in the school system should strive to be a teacher and a principal, because that's where it's at. And Ms. Turner, I had a question for you. Your recommendation, was that just for principals making over $100,000, or was that for all school district employees making over $100,000 would not be subject?
Well, I think Mr. Thurman has already dealt with those that are in central office that are over $100,000. So they're already in, I think, in the 2%, if I understand correctly. And I was just advocating that we remove them, those that are making over 100, that are in principalships, for 1 year, not for the rest of their lives. I was just saying for 1 year, and give more consideration, because there's a very big disparity. And I do understand that our salaries are not competitive, and you're probably, I've seen that. But there's also a big disparity and a big gap between principals' pays that are in DeKalb County School District. So I was looking at those that are being well compensated as principals, and there are those that need to be increased. Hope that answers.
Yeah, in support of where Mr. Thurman was going, if we made general administrative employees, if we gave them a 0% raise, that would definitely more encourage them to go back into the classroom. That would be a move in that direction that Mr. Thurman was talking about.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to remind the board that employees, all of us, all of them, have not, most of them did not receive a raise for 7 straight years.
Have we done a...
So what you're proposing has already been in place for 7 straight years. Last year, they received a 1% COLA for the first time in 7 straight years, plus suffered under at least 6 furlough days over that same period. We have to keep things in perspective. Where we are today is a new place in time where we are talking about raises, but these same men and women for 7 straight years did not receive a cost of living adjustment and suffered through 6 years, 6 or 7 days, furlough days. And I don't think we should forget that.
Right, and we need to set the perspective in that I don't think we've done an HR audit across the district in years. And if I recall correctly, the last one we did was about 4 years ago, and it said most employees are way overpaid. So I would say this is a correction, if anything else.
Well, I think that, from what I understand, that may have been done by Dr. Atkinson.
Yes, sir.
And, well...
No, I hear you. Then another one would definitely be in order.
I think another one would be great, beginning in July.
Like you said, to put things into perspective, and if we're underpaying our employees, that is definitely not the place that we want to be.
Mr. Orson?
Can I, because this harks back to the conversation we had an hour ago, can I just put a suggestion out there that perhaps could synthesize some of these ideas? Because I think there's merit in a lot of these arguments. I mean, there's concern about the size of the central office, but confusion about what goes into the central office and what the relative positions are and how they're categorized. I think there's great value in our principals. I have always likened them to our kind of captains in the Army. They are the people in the field who we really, in a high-functioning organization, will be the people who will really be executing on a day-to-day basis. So, but we're trying to come up with a budget, right? And some of my questions to you earlier about financial impact. So I'd like to, and hopefully this does justice to some of what Ms. Turner has been proposing. I want to put out a couple ideas, some of which are just going to be redundant of what you said. So we've said that the plan has for all, E-schedule employees to receive 3 to 4% increases depending on seniority. I'd like us to consider that we add all other school-based personnel on that same 3 to 4% increase, and that for remaining what we would categorize as non-school-based, which I guess means central office, that we use a cutoff that, I guess if we're using Ms. Turner's reference, if they're at 100,000 above, that they're at 2%, and if they're below, they're at 3 to 4% based on seniority. I'm trying to come up with something that would simplify it, be manageable, pay homage to the various viewpoints that have been expressed here, and allow us to, hopefully before midnight, vote on a budget.
Well, Mr. Chair.
Go right ahead, Mr. Superintendent.
It's an interesting conversation. And, you know, I'm engaged in it at this point in a very interesting way. I don't understand the concerns, actually, to be quite honest with you, other than to change what's being proposed. The employees that we seem to be advocating for, I've not heard from.
I appreciate that. I know we heard particularly a lot from our social workers and school psychologists and counselors, and I think that's great that we've clarified that they're included. But to Ms. Turner's earlier point that we have relatively low-wage employees who are above our minimum, I share her concern about doing more, and I get that it may divert a small amount from that formula, but we're really talking, if we're at 1/10 of a percentage point, I'd be amazed at the end of the day for that subgroup that she's talking about, or 1/10 of a percentage point. And I just think in doing right by a certain subgroup of employees who, again, don't benefit directly from the floor that we're setting for wage, and again, and to the point you made so pointedly, Mr. Thurman, that if they're making $25,000 a year and we give them an additional percentage point or two, it is meaningful in those individuals' lives, but from a budgetary impact, literally we're talking about $250 to $500 over the course of the year for those individual employees. And again, I'm trying to just synthesize the various viewpoints. I don't think the intent, and I don't think Ms. Turner's intent was to just change it for the sake of changing, but to try to bring an additional level of fairness, whether or not we heard from those employees. Those may be employees, you know, our school psychologists and social workers and counselors may have much better access to the electronic forms of communication to ensure that our inboxes are clearly, you know, receive their correspondence. And some of these other employees who are out in the field and working for Mr. Williams may not have the same ready access to fire off an email to us. And I just, to me, it feels right to also address that group, whether or not they've contacted us in an effort to continue to raise the standard of living for employees who are working hard for a system and respecting that. And I also get, and we can throw this as sort of a straw man about the impact on the 65%. I am certainly an advocate of, as we talked earlier the year, moving beyond that. But I also want to be realistic that what we're talking about in that subgroup, I think Dr. Bell would be hard-pressed to find that it's much more than a rounding error in the computations that he would make. And so it feels right to me, and that's why I put it out on the table.
Well,
That's not the majority sentiment. I also respect that.
Let's be clear now. As it relates to the lowest paid employees, these were men and women who have been unnoticed for decades. They are being discussed today, and my staff will tell you, because I personally made it an issue, that no one had ever raised a concern about our lowest paid employees. There is no other school district that has as a minimum wage $10.25 an hour. There's no one considering it. And I will go ahead and add, and each year, at least for the last several years, we have found a fund balance in the federal fund that supported it. So if in previous budgets we did not address their salary inequities, it wasn't because of a lack of money. If you look at what we're doing for our lowest paid employees, it's never been done before. So let's be clear. And it's being done, and I hate to use the word, because I set it as a priority. Let's be fair in our advocacy.
I don't think anybody's diminishing your support. I know that we as a board and board members have in fact addressed, particularly in the form of furlough days in past years, about the impact on our lowest paid employees. But it diminishes nothing about and our support, and I don't think anybody's questioning the proposal you have made with regard to our lowest paid employees. It's, you know, and I think in the nomenclature of economics, you know, it's sort of the working poor who normally get squeezed the most, the people who are above the level of federal assistance and below the level of making a wage in which they can fully support their families. And I think, concurring with the sentiment you had about our lowest paid employees, I think some of us are simply asking, can we broaden that, not necessarily by the change of the minimum you've set, but by broadening the group of people who might get a small additional benefit from the plan we're proposing to help them out. And I am hard-pressed to believe that that would have either a dramatic impact on our budget or do anything but send the right message that we do care about those people. And I think our belaboring the discussion on it suggests that we're sending an unintended message to them.
Well, I think we're being disingenuous at one level. I think the way to really do this is to recognize what is actually has been done and being proposed, and to look at over a 2-year period. The furlough days that we eliminated, 6 of them, acknowledge it. The hour that was added back for bus drivers, acknowledge it. The minimum wage that was set for all employees, acknowledge it. The wage increases that were made for all hourly wage people who were being underpaid based on a careful analysis over the metro area and across the state. The additional salary that's being given to our pre-K professionals who've been ignored. The way to really do it, I think, Mr. Orson, to your point, is to acknowledge first what is already being proposed and to see how or if that addresses the concerns that are being raised. I get a little, you know, it's interesting that we're willing to apparently ignore what is actually being proposed without even any discussion of it. I don't remember any discussion about the proposal for our lowest paid employees. There has been no discussion or questions regarding who it impacts and how it impacts. So I think you start there. And if there's room to build on that, I'm open to it, but you have to start at that point. What are we doing? First of all, what hadn't we done for the last 40 years? And another question is, why hadn't we done it? And what have we done, what are we proposing, and what have we done most recently? And the one thing that really impacts all employees is that we have to continue to manage properly. So that's kind of where I am. I mean, at this point, you know, like I say, it's dollars and cents, but I think we have a very strong, holistic strategy in place that we can benefit all of our employees, at the same time protect the fund balance, and recognize that during the year, this is what the board asked us to do. And I know Ms. Turner's at the high end and you're discussing the low end, but I just think I'd like to go through what we're proposing for lower paid employees in detail before we make any other decisions. I think that would help you. And then talk about how this school district has consistently, historically, ignored these very individuals.
Well, certainly, this is becoming a little disturbing to me. As an educator for over 30-something years, and I have a real passion and compassion for educators, for children, our families. As a former single parent, making money, good money in New York as an educator, and having 3 children, 1 in college and 2 in private schools, and trying to make it. Do we punish people at the top because of what they've earned and what they've gained? I think not. We have to begin to look at the fact that we can't fix societal ills and what has taken place, and I think that's what I've been concerned about us as a board. We've been trying to rush to fix stuff. The atrocities that were actually put against our employees for the last few years. You know, I remember asking Mark Elgard, Dr. Elgard from Sachs, how did everybody sit for 10 years and let this stuff go down the way it went down? We most certainly can't fix it. We've done a hell of a job in 2 years. But the reality is that I cannot support punishing one group who've been just as steadfast, and because they make a certain amount and you're going to take away from them. One of the schools that the principal came from another school district, accepted the job at Redan, and when he found out the salary, said he could not take it. Administrators go through a lot more, so you're managing, they're managers. We want to pay a coach a certain amount. We want to do all these things. And I think until we change our perception about educators at any level, I have an administrative certification also. I was an administrator also. And understand what it takes to put together a budget at the local level. When you're managing 75, 85 teachers and the children, trying to know everybody's name, all of the auxiliary people that are in the school system, all in that school also, dealing with parents, the social workers, everybody else. So it's not that you're just giving people money. These people have earned the money. And how do you take something away? And as Mrs. Thurman said, they hadn't had a raise in over 7 years. At some point, we've got to be realistic. A lot of what's going on is not just the school's problem. I talked with CEO, interim CEO May, and I said it's not just a school problem. We keep taking on all these burdens. A lot of it is social, it's political, it's economical. What is the county doing? So we can't do all this on our own. We're trying to fix everything ourselves. We just cannot do it. And I think we've got to be realistic, but trying to take away from one group in order to fix another is not going to help. There's a lot more that needs to be done with that. What are we doing to help people with budgeting, even at the top or the bottom end? We're not going to raise that bottom up until we believe that everybody should have, and there should be no have-nots. But it's going to take time. You got to have a plan. And I would like to see us come up with a formidable plan. I was reading an email from one of our employees, and she said the same thing. I believe DeKalb County can go back to where it was, be back where it was, but there needs to be a plan. And I'd like to not see us make an arbitrary decision. Take this budget, do what needs to be done, and come up with a plan. What can we do along with the county and other social services to bring people from the bottom up? Because nobody ever wants to be at the bottom. But at the same vein, we cannot take the top and cut them off. Because then what will be happening, you're going to have a compressed level, and then that top becomes more at the bottom and everybody's at the same point. So we have to be realistic about what we're asking for, and I do respect what you're saying, Ms. Turner, but I would really, really like to think that we would not take away from one group, because we're not going to fix the other group completely. I want to make sure we give that group what they deserve and give them so we can help them to come up. But I don't want to see us take away from one group.
Thank you, Dr. Morley. Mrs. Turner?
Thank you, Dr. Morley, for those comments. Let me just say this. I realized that I was under, it may just happen that I might get crucified. I knew it. And I want to say this again for the record. I put out a question for consideration. I am not advocating that we punish our staff in any way whatsoever. I want to be very clear about that. I just put out a possibility for consideration. And so I have heard everything that has been said. Every opinion, of course, is duly noted. I want to say this, and then I promise, Dr. Johnson, this is it. I think it is an exemplary job which has occurred on this budget. I think to go from the bottom and to give our workers $10.25, I think everybody up here would give Mr. Thurman and his staff a standing ovation. I'm the new kid on the block. I never knew the wages were so low. The minute I was made aware of it, because I just got the report that showed the salaries, then I'm glad it was addressed. So I am not one of those that would sit by idly and look and allow something to happen that is such a travesty and an injustice for our employees. So on the record, when I saw it and it was addressed simultaneously with the proposal to raise our lowest paid workers up to $10.25, it had been rectified in my opinion. So in closing, I put a proposal out, a suggestion, a question, and that's it. I accept what everybody has said. I think that some great points have been made. I'm not advocating Peter Pan, rob from the poor, the rich and give to the poor. I'm just saying, let's put the money where it's most needed for just 1 year is what I was advocating. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Turner. Dr. Irwin, are you ready for the question yet?
So going back to our principals are still going to get their, what was it, 4%?
Yeah.
4 or 3, depending on how many years they have vested. Okay.
No, we didn't. She didn't.
No, I was just making sure. We're good
She
on
was
that.
not going after the amendment. Okay.
I call the question.
The question has been called to approve the DeKalb County Board of Education budget for 2015-2016.
Actually, what you're going to be voting on now, if Dr. Irwin is moving to call the question, is closing debate.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. We're voting to close the debate. All in favor, by show of hands. All right, we're closing the debate, and now we are voting to approve the original motion to approve the schools, the DeKalb County School District budget for 2015 and 16.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If I could just say, as proposed by the superintendent this evening.
As proposed by the superintendent.
Yeah, the document's on the table this evening with the
Okay.
slight modifications of the E-scale.
Do you all get that?
As proposed, including the new E-scale including this document. Yeah, including this document, the 432 plan.
Okay.
With the, yes, sir. With the list.
Margaret, would you reread what we're doing?
It would be, it is requested that the Board of Education finally adopt the DeKalb County School Districts. That's what he said.
She said finally.
But that's what Dr. Bell put in it.
You can't say finally.
Oh, Dr. Bell?
Yes, ma'am.
Keep finally in or take it out?
No, I'm just kidding.
Well, in the sense it's the final budget action.
Okay.
Yeah.
The final budget, the final.
That's what you approved? It's a sign. It's not going anywhere. Yeah. Which we can read, we can amend it and take it away if we get ready. Go ahead, I'm sorry. Would you reread the recommendation?
It is requested that the DeKalb Board of Education adopt the final DeKalb County School District budget for fiscal year 2015-2016 as proposed by the superintendent, including the new E-schedule.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Yes. Just say yes.
And e-boards. And e-boards.
Okay. No further discussion. I call for the vote. Do we just go by the show of hands? No, not the hands. Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
now I'll start the vote.
It's not coming up. There it is. Mr. Jester? Okay, is that what the no is? Okay. Okay, 6-1 is approved, 6-1.
Thank you.
Okay, approved, 6-1.